Lindsay Halligan has entered the chat, and not in a good way. There's a big difference between off the record and on the record. Hi, I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and I'm here with Kelly Hyman for another discussion here on Legal AF on all the foolishness coming out of this administration. Please make sure to hit subscribe, like, and sound off in the comments with regards to the discussion today. So, Lindsay Halligan had a little bit of a problem. She decided that she was going to approach a reporter unsolicited in a Signal chat. The reporter is from the outlet called Lawfare, and her name is Anna Bauer. So she had a little bit of a back and forth with her and basically was like, your reporting is incorrect when it comes to the prosecution of AG Letitia James. Well, she didn't quite see fit to specify what exactly was wrong with said reporting, but instead decided to berate her and then say, oh, by the way, everything we discussed was off the record. Yeah, that's not quite how this works. And Lindsay Halligan should know that because, she has a degree in broadcast journalism. Yeah, so she kind of should know how this works, but I'm going to pause there. Kelly, thoughts? Because this whole thing is quite bizarre. I mean, I've got plenty of thoughts, as we all well know, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say on that.
Be careful what you write because you can't take it back. Now, supposedly in Signal, they have some kind of way to make messages disappear. And the reporter has come on TV and said that she took screenshot images of this conversation, text message between herself and a U.S. attorney. So it makes you think, why did she reach out? What was the ultimate goal of Lindsay reaching out to this reporter? To change her mind, to persuade her? What do you think?
Well, first of all, backing up for a second, and we're going to show the video, like a little quick clip of the interview with Anna Bauer from Lawfare and kind of how she was like, huh? But it's not normal for prosecutors to speak out about these types of cases that cases that they're prosecuting to the media just like that. Normally you'd have a press conference and you'd be like, okay, here are the charges, and indictments come back. Here are the charges. We're going to be moving forward. And then silence. Like you do not speak. The next time you speak is in the courtroom. And then maybe you give an interview in response to the verdict. But it is not normal for prosecutors to speak the same way to the media because prosecutors have a different ethical obligation. Defense attorneys have more latitude, which maybe, again, Lindsay Halligan never really been a prosecutor and was the president's private attorney. So maybe she just didn't know. But normally, defense attorneys have wide latitude because, again, they're defending their client. They have to do so vigorously. So they have more latitude in being able to almost try the case in public opinion and in the court of public opinion. Prosecutors can't do that. But let's pause for a second and see what Anna Bauer had to say and her reaction to this.
She approached me. This was an unsolicited message. This is from a sitting United States attorney. Any public official who is in a high profile position, the way that she is, she is prosecuting two of the most high profile cases in the country. She reaches out to me. We do not have an ongoing reporter-source relationship. And she never once in that entire conversation suggest in any way that we were anything but on the record. And people who know these conventions well with journalism, it's that you have to have a basis on which you are speaking, an agreement. Otherwise, you assume by default that you were on the record.
Okay, so, I'm with you, Kelly. I don't quite know what she was trying to accomplish here.
You bring up a really interesting point because you think if Lindsay wanted to get her message across, she wanted to make sure that her side of the story got out to the public masses, that you would have a press conference, right? And stick within, we say, the four corners of a document, the four corners of the indictment, and speak to the press and stand up and say, we brought these charges. This is what the indictment says. you're innocent in a court of law until proven guilty, but whatever the indictment says, and bring that forward and then not take any questions. But the fact that it did happen that way from a PR situation, you would think that that would be the right move to get in front of it, to hold the press conference and to do that. So I thought that was really interesting about the point that you brought up about that is usually normally done. But I think it's also important to remember the fact of off the record, on the record, and why reporters kind of do that. And as far as I understand what I've heard, first, you have to say before you start a conversation with a reporter, I want this off the record, right? And there has to be a meeting of the minds. Listen, whatever I tell you, do you agree that this is going to be a private conversation? And it's my understanding that the reporter was okay with that from what she's said in the media. If she would have known up front that this was off the record, that she would have agreed to that. So from that standpoint, if you want it kind of to be private, but not your exact words, why not do something like that? Say up front. And if she said, the reporter said, no, I don't want this off the record, then say, you know what? I'm going to do a press conference and I'm going to get an opportunity to go out in front of all the public and tell my story about the indictment and the allegations.
Yeah. And you know, Kelly, we've seen this a ton of times, especially under this presidential administration, where a senior official who would only speak on the condition of anonymity, you know, and we were able to find out interesting aspects or behind the scenes of different cases or different policies. But again, the person's like, I can't have my name on the record. So this is a common practice. And again, for someone with a degree in broadcast journalism, somebody who has given interviews before, knows how all of this works, has a communications team, you'd think she'd know better. And also what was so bizarre is that you reach out to a reporter unsolicited. So it's not like they had an ongoing discussion. Like she spoke to her, met her a couple years ago, and then next thing you know, she's popping up in old girls' chats, right? But you reach out to this reporter and you're like, you're wrong. And she's like, okay, I'm wrong. Fine. Well, tell me how I'm wrong and I'm happy to correct it. But you don't give her anything. So you just basically reached out to her to berate her. And then you're telling her, keep the fact that I berated you off the record, but tell everybody that you were wrong. Like make that make sense, Kelly.
I don't quite understand that reasoning, because if you want your side to be told, then you would kind of say what it is. Like, yeah, okay, you're wrong. But then maybe there was a fear of ethical violations, of potentially saying stuff about the grand jury that's not supposed to come out, and trying to stay within, as I said, the four corners of the indictment to make sure that that is conveyed. And maybe that was a backstep, like, oh, I can't do this. Who knows? I have absolutely no idea.
And, you know, this all kind of plays into all of the firings and departures that we're seeing from the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Eastern District of Virginia. Because again, once you see that hemorrhaging of experienced people who know how cases are supposed to be tried, who know how they're supposed to conduct themselves during the pendency of a case, that's when you start to see and continue to see these missteps and mistakes and just dumb moves. So we now learned that Kristen Bird and Elizabeth Yusi were terminated from their posts as assistant U.S. attorneys. And Elizabeth Yusi had been at the office for about 15 years. So again, someone who's pretty senior. And Kristen Bird has been there for the past 6 years. And she was the deputy chief of the Narcotics and Violent Crime Unit. So again, high level people who are being pushed out. And this comes on the backs of Eric Seibert, who was the interim U.S. attorney, got pushed out in favor of Lindsay Halligan, who immediately filed charges against Comey and AG Letitia James. And then you had First Assistant U.S. Attorney Maggie Cleary, who also left her post. And same type of situation. She was supposed to be the next interim, leader of this office, the interim U.S. Attorney. And then, surprise, surprise, she's out because Lindsay Halligan is in. So that turmoil, I think, speaks to the condition of the office and the fact that there's no one there to be like, listen, you're going off the rails. Don't do this. There's a reason why we keep, we don't speak during the pendency of a trial. There's a reason why we don't reach out to reporters on the record, that sort of thing. So, Kelly, how do you think that weighs into all of this?
These prosecutors are, as I say, apolitical, that they serve justice, not a political party. And so they're there to uphold the law and to make sure that justice is served. And with that, as you said, someone's 15 years experience has gone through different administrations. But the knowledge that that prosecutor has of knowing how things work, it's sad from a justice standpoint that they're leaving because that knowledge is no longer there. And so you have someone that's, as I would say, a career prosecutor that's been there for years, that is higher up, that has experience and knowledge, that tries cases and knows the ins and outs of the criminal justice system, leaves. That's a disservice not only for our justice, but for upholding the law and making sure that people are held accountable.
And what was also perturbing is that, going back to the whole exchange between Lawfare's Anna Bowser and, Lindsay Halligan is, the fact that basically this is all as a result of a tweet on X where basically Anna Bauer was summing up someone else's reporting, being like, this indictment's pretty thin. This case is totally pretty thin. Like, there's nowhere for it to go, And the fact that Lindsay Halligan could not point to concrete evidence being like, this is the reason why we think Letitia James is guilty. And all of the evidence that we're familiar with, including snippets of testimony from the grandniece of AG Letitia James, who resides in the home that's at the subject of whether or not there was mortgage fraud, whether or not AG James claimed two primary residences versus she lived in one and co-signed a loan for the other. Everything that we're seeing out there indicates that there was no reason for AG James to be charged because it's not illegal. It is not mortgage fraud to co-sign a mortgage for someone else. It's not, because you're not going to live there. You're just co-signing the mortgage. And so with Anna Bauer kind of pushing back and being like, well, what clarity is there? Give me something. And the fact that Lindsay Halligan couldn't, that tells me that the case truly is very thin, and they're setting themselves up for a very high profile embarrassment when that jury comes back not guilty, or even worse, if the judge ends up tossing the indictment out or tossing the case out because of procedural defects, because of, lack of evidence, whatever the case may be. I mean, Kelly, what do you think? Because this to me is spelling disaster for this case.
Well, as I understand it, as a prosecutor, when they look of whether they're going to bring a case or not, they have to believe that they can get, in fact, a conviction on the case. And what that means is that they have sufficient evidence, because the burden is beyond a reasonable doubt, that they can prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And not only that, but also if, in fact, the person is convicted, that it is upheld on appeal. If the defendant decides to appeal the case, that they, being the prosecutor office, is going to prevail on that case. And so from that standpoint, is justice being served in the case? Is there sufficient evidence? Now, this case is going to go to trial in January, unless something happens with the potential motion for selective prosecution. And what that means is that Letitia James' attorney will most likely file saying that she is being selectively prosecuted, and use as exhibit number 1 Trump's posting on social media about Letitia James, Comey, And if, that in fact is not successful, we're going to have to see what's going to happen when this case goes to trial, if it does, in January, whether the prosecution, what do they have to prove their case, and can they prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt?
Yeah, and just, as a final thought, we've seen in the District of Columbia where the U.S. Attorney's Office oversees local prosecutions, which is very different than, the rest of the country. The rest of the country, it's state level prosecutors who handle, state level felonies. And then if there's a federal issue, then the U.S. Attorney's Office handles that. The U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. has been losing left, right, and center, because the U.S. attorney there is pushing forward cases that they don't have a strong factual basis. It's clear they can't prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And the juries are like, not guilty. No, thank you. What are you doing? And so this has become an embarrassment. Well, I don't know if anyone in this administration truly feels embarrassed, but it is an embarrassment, and a mockery of the judicial system, because if you're bringing all these cases and the juries are consistently like, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, you need to take a look at yourself and be like, what am I doing wrong? And how can I address this to make sure I'm not wasting court time? I'm not, re-victimizing victims who may come into court, testify, and then now they got a not guilty and they, have to walk out with this horrible taste in their mouth from the entire experience. Or maybe these are victimless crimes, which again, you're still wasting court and people's time to come sit there and, preside over a case that has no real factual basis. So I don't know. Kelly, you get the last word, because this is a lot.
Bringing to your point when you talk about the expenses, but then also the fact of the taxpayers' money that are paying for these trials, and then also the expense of the defendant as well. It is very expensive to hire an attorney, and that expense as well. And then also dealing with that emotionally of going through a trial and also being charged with serious crimes. These are serious allegations where, in fact, Letitia James could potentially serve up to 30 years in jail for bank fraud, and the toll that must take on someone. These are serious issues and serious concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm Melba Pearson, otherwise known as the resident legal diva. That's Kelly Hyman. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Legal AF. Stay safe, stay informed, and keep demanding justice. Take care.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.